Well, I was about 15 minutes into this when I realized that the thing wasn't recording. So it's going to wind up on the overhead a little bit different from the way it normally is. It's going to be sort of the equivalent of a PowerPoint presentation. Of course, we've got these availability times where, right now it's Columbus Day, so Tuesday's going to be a little weird because we've got these team meetings that I'm doing all day Tuesday. You won't see this until after that anyway. But there are days where I'm not as available as it looks like I will be because I may be in team meetings. Very few people are calling me in the lab anyway. I'm responding pretty well on email. The message system in Blackboard is very wonky. I don't check it that often. You can send messages to me, but don't expect a really quick response. And don't submit stuff into the message system. And I will have sent a notice out about this. When you do submit stuff, put your names on it. Is that the way that I have to print stuff out a mile away from where I'm actually on my computer, if I'm printing off stuff and it has no name on it, and then I've got a pile of them, it's like, okay, who the hell is this? So put your names on stuff. So we are doing chapter 9. No, I'm sorry, chapter 8. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. Well, actually, let me do this first. Hey, wait a minute. This is grass. We've been eating grass. Well, plants. Photosynthesis, bottom of the food chain. That's what this chapter is about. So we're going to talk about basic plant processes, and then we're going to talk about basic plant groups, organismal biology. Photosynthesis is the process of capturing, one of the processes of capturing energy from the environment and putting it into chemical bond energy, which is much more accessible for most living things than getting it out of the environment. Now, when we go back through this in the second semester, we will talk more about the real molecules of it, but I do want to mention a little bit about the molecules of it. Carbon dioxide, 1 carbon, 2 oxygens. Glucose, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. The carbons and the oxygens are coming from this. And there's 6 of them over here. One at a time, these need to be stuck together into a larger molecule. And that's where this energy goes. It goes to stick the carbons together. It becomes bond energy. Now the hydrogen that's in the glucose comes from the water. So the water contributes the hydrogen. Hydrogen is really useful for moving electrons around in chemical activities, again, second semester. But when you have taken the hydrogens from the water, you wind up with oxygen left over. So that's basically how the process works. Carbon and oxygen go into the glucose, hydrogen from the water goes into the glucose, and you're building molecules where energy has been stored in a more usable form. Now, plants, like any living thing, have processes that use energy, and they need something to do that with. They don't use the energy from the light directly to do their stuff. They use the energy stored in the glucose to do their stuff. So that's a lot of what the plants are using glucose for. That is what consumers are using the glucose for. They're taking the energy and they're moving it from glucose, which is a wonderful molecule, but not that easy to pull back apart, and transferring it into a molecule that is much more usable. ATP. And again, we'll do the molecular stuff this second semester, but basically Glucose takes a lot of specialized attack in order to pull those carbons back apart. And you move the energy mostly into ATP, into a few other things, but into molecules that are stable enough that you can get them places where you need to use them, but unstable enough that you can easily pull them apart and use the energy that's holding them together to do things. And that's respiration. For those of you who screwed that up on the first exam, moving energy from not so usable molecules, from those bonds, into bond energy in more usable molecules. And whether you're using oxygen to do that, and whether you're getting the energy from glucose, or you're getting it from proteins, or you're getting it from lipids, is that you're still moving energy from not so easy to use molecules into easy to use molecules. And ATP is the major, primary, easy to use molecule that you find in all sorts of living things. The other thing that plants use glucose for is, I should have grabbed myself a piece of wood. Wood. This is lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of glucoses bound together very, very firmly. Very, very stable configurations. Plant fiber. Lots and lots of glucoses put together because the plant wants them to stay together. They're part of what the plant is. That main molecule is cellulose that the plants use for plant structure, and that is extremely stable. But plants have other needs for glucose. They use it for energy, and they sometimes need to defer what they're going to do with it until later. Think about this right now. It's the fall, the leaves are dropping off of the trees. Next spring, the trees are going to have to rebuild the leaves. Well, there's no leaves at that point doing photosynthesis, so where are they getting the energy from? They have stored the energy in the tree, mostly in the roots, in the form of other starches. Cellulose is a type of starch, sort of, and a molecule with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of glucoses or other kinds of sugars stuck together is a starch. Now, when the plant stores a starch to break it down and use it later, they don't want it in a really, really firm, hard to get apart form. And that's where we benefit, because you can't eat this. Very few living things can get the usable energy, the glucose, out of wood. And it turns out not even to be particularly easy to get it out of fibers. You know, the cows can do it, but, and you know, it's very nutritious. You know, when you're eating grass and you can digest those fibers, there's a lot of energy there. But it's a very complex system to get that energy apart. Our system is better at breaking down the starches that were meant to be broken down in the first place, because the plant was putting them aside to use them later. And that's the starches in a potato, the starches in an onion, you know, the starches in grains. Is that those seed starches and root and tuber starches are there to be broken down by the plant and used later. They don't care if we're going to get nutrition from them. Is that they wanted to get energy and structure out of them later. And that's really the difference between digestible starches and indigestible starches. Now, plants do not live by starch alone. Now, in order to squeeze this in here, I made a list here. You should probably separate this out as a line-by-line list, because I'm going to talk about each of these separately. Plants need to build things other than glucose. They need to build ATP. They need to build proteins. Proteins contain nitrogen. You'll notice there's no nitrogen in carbon dioxide and water. There's no phosphorus in carbon dioxide and water. The P part of ATP is phosphorus. Lots of different minerals the plants need. Iron is a critical mineral in the photosynthesis process. It helps move electrons around. Magnesium is actually embedded in the chlorophyll molecule. It can't function without magnesium embedded into it as a side group. I'm trying to avoid the terminology. And there's other minerals like sulfur that plants do use, at least some. And so they need access to other types of minerals. Now, plants originally evolved in the oceans. Carbon dioxide was dissolved in the water. The water was certainly there. Light, if you're close enough to the surface, lots and lots of light. Nitrates and phosphates erode off of rocks and are involved in the runoff, and a lot of the minerals as well. So ocean plants get all the needs they want, provided usually that they're close enough to where the runoffs are. You get far enough out into the middle of the oceans, and especially the iron does not get that far out. And so there's not a heck of a lot of plants growing. You would think the oceans would just be covered in plants, and that would be a huge bottom of a food chain. But it isn't. There's a lot of places that are mineral depleted. And when plants invaded the continents, they moved up the freshwater systems. All this stuff was in the runoff to some extent. But eventually, they needed some help. The air around us is full of nitrogen in a very tightly bound form that you can't really use easily to make proteins. You need to fiddle with it and make it into nitrates. And then you can make amino acids and make proteins out of that. And of course, we're built of, our chemistry is all protein based, goes right back to the first chapter. You need phosphates for ATP and for other processes. As plants moved into less and less, more and more deprived runoff, more and more dilute runoff, they, in order to be successful, needed help accessing mostly this, but sometimes that. And there are funguses and bacteria that can pull that tightly bound nitrogen out of the atmosphere, play with it, and produce nitrates. And the plants gave them other types of food, right? Glucose, and a nice place to live. And so very early on in this process of plants moving from the oceans onto the land, they'd established relationships with what are called symbionts, nitrogen-fixing symbionts, sometimes phosphorus-fixing symbionts. And land plants absolutely positively needed these guys to help them get out of the water and onto the land, because there wasn't a heck of a lot of nitrate or phosphate available. There wasn't really much in the way of soil. They needed access from other systems. So they gradually, as they moved farther and farther and farther away from actual water sources, just using the water from the sky, they needed their symbionts to give them the nitrates and sometimes the phosphates that they needed. And every plant you look at out in the world has got nitrogen buddies, its own microbiome basically, usually embedded in its roots, that fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere for it. There still are some environments that are somewhat depleted. A lot of rainforest, swampy areas, a lot of flow through of very dilute water, not a lot of nitrates or phosphates in the water, not that great in the way of minerals. And some of the plants, in order to augment their nutrients, have developed systems where they can catch and digest animals, carnivorous plants, like the Venus flytrap. The caption here says, her tentacles swaying seductively in the breeze, the Venus kid trap was again poised and ready. Based obviously on the Venus flytrap that catches bugs, which incidentally closes by growing the outside of the leaf really, really fast, makes the outside longer than the inside, bends it in, and then it has these tendrils that kind of intertwine, and so it goes like that around a fly once the fly has triggered the inside, which takes a couple of flips of a trigger in order to do that. And then in order to get to open back up, it's got to grow the inside back out. So every time it closes and opens, it actually gets bigger, until eventually it's too big, it has to drop off and be replaced by another leaf on the plant. Little side thing. But this is all connected to nutrition. So for land plants, carbon dioxide comes from the atmosphere. Don't want to fall over my wood demonstration. Water comes from the groundwater for the most part. There are some plants that can pull enough water out of the atmosphere to get them by. They've got to live in very, very wet conditions. Minerals from the groundwater. Oxygen, for which you may think, but wait a minute, isn't oxygen coming out of photosynthesis? It is up here, but this part of the plant is not doing photosynthesis. It's living, it's consuming, it's living off of the carbon or the glucose coming down to grow roots, structure, and energy. And in order to do that, it's going to be doing aerobic respiration. So it needs a source of oxygen in order to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about light. Light is energy. It is electromagnetic energy. Electromagnetic energy is wave energy. It travels as waves. It has a speed limit. In a vacuum, the universal speed limit for light, 186,000 miles per second, something like that. In other media that light can go through, it may go slower, but whatever it is, it goes the same speed. But different frequencies may be impeded more by different things. Well, I'll leave that up there. Matter interacts with different parts of the light, In this case, all of these colors would be absorbed by the paint on the car. Just the red would reflect off. The red would be absorbed by red absorbing pigments in your eye. As we can see, red, blue, and green, to which, if you know anything about art, how do we see yellow? Turns out there's a tricky thing to how you see yellow. Because, if I gave you a can of blue, a can of green, and a can of red paint and said, mix me up some yellow, you'd go, you can't do it. So how do you take red, green, and blue receptors and see yellow? It's because this is a little bit more complicated in how the frequencies dance in your receptors in your eyes. Now, energy can reflect off like it did off the car. It can be absorbed like the other frequencies were done by the car. It can pass through things like it does for the windows of the car. The car is transparent. Now, car windows are transparent for visible light frequencies, the colors we can see. It is a barrier to ultraviolet. That's why you don't tan inside your car. You have to have your hand outside the window for your arm to tan. And so some things are reflected off, some things are absorbed, some things scatter certain frequencies. When light hits the atmosphere, the blue parts of the overall visible light spectrum bounce around a lot more. If you look up at the sky close to the sun, the sky looks very white. If you look away, it looks very blue, because around the sun, the light hasn't really scattered out. You see all the light together, all the different colors that we process as white. This white stuff doesn't really exist. Is your brain produces white when we throw enough frequencies at your processing system. But away from the sun, you're just seeing the blue that's been bouncing around up there. So you're going to need to, I want to leave this up here, so you're going to be taking notes, and I'm not going to be writing as much stuff down. So you're going to have to follow, and this is the way you need to do notes in a lot of things anyway. Light travels as a wave. The waves can be close together or far apart. They're all traveling at the same speed. So think of waves like hitting the side of a boat. Whack, 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 whack. If the waves are close together, it's whack, 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 whack. I sound like a duck. Energy, hitting the boat, a lot of energy. If the waves are stretched out, they're hitting, not as much energy. The wavelength is associated with the energy that that wavelength can deliver. Short wavelength is going to deliver more energy than long wavelengths. So this is 10 to the third meters, so this is thousands of meters long. You get radio waves, so those are very long wavelengths. These are nanometers. These are millions and billions of a meter. Really short wavelengths are gamma rays. Now, the other measurement of light energy is the frequency. If the waves are traveling at the same speed, then the number of waves that are going to hit you in a second, short wavelengths where they're packed close together, a lot of them are going to hit you in a second. Where they stretch out, not so many of them are going to hit you in a second. So for frequency, the higher the frequency, the more waves you're being hit by over the course of a second, the more energy. So short wavelength, high frequency, lots of energy. Long wavelength, low frequency, less energy. And that's what you get here, where, now keep in mind, the reason that this is visible light is because we can see it. Our visual systems have evolved on the surface of the Earth. A lot of these frequencies may be flying through space, but they don't tend to get to the surface of the Earth, at least not in significant amounts to make it easy for us to detect them. Also, detecting them would be tricky. And a lot of these don't really exist much in our neighborhood of nature. Microwaves are an interesting thing in that certain materials absorb certain wavelengths. And a microwave oven throws certain wavelengths that tend to shake hydrogen atoms that are attached to things like water and other sorts of things that are in food, shakes the holy hell out of them. Movement of molecules equals heat, heats them up. Radar guns, the cops use, are a type of microwave. Is that a lot of communication? Your cell phones are a type of microwave. But there's a lot of different frequencies of microwaves that we use for different things. And radio waves, we use a lot of different frequencies for different things. Visible light, these are your short wavelengths down at the purple end. These are your long wavelengths up at the red end. On the long side of the red is the infrared. Things that are hot radiate infrared radiation. That's why infrared goggles pick up people, because people radiate heat. And off of the short end, you get ultraviolet. Ultraviolet packs a decent punch. It can break your DNA. That's why it can cause skin cancer. And what plants absorb is mostly not this, right? Plants have chlorophyll. Chlorophyll reflects green frequencies. And it absorbs all of the other ones to different degrees. So it absorbs blues, it absorbs purples, it absorbs reds. In fact, when people first started to do a lot of growing of plants indoors and wanted to produce grow lights, the early grow lights were largely purple, because with the same wattage, this packs more punch than this does. So they produce purple lights. Now you said, I bought a grow light, it's not purple. That's because they found out people not too happy working under purple lights all the time. So most grow lights now put out a whole range of frequencies that look white to us, so it's easier for people to work under them. Leaves falling off the trees. Calvin says, "My, what an ugly tree," and it attacks him with a pile of leaves. And his dad goes, "Where the heck did my leaf pile go?" And he said, "It went back home. Don't you have anything bigger than a rake?" Pigments. I was just talking about chlorophyll. There's a few different types of chlorophyll, and the absorption and use frequencies are a little bit different from one to another. But typically they produce green plants. We'll talk about certain types of algae that have slightly different colors and can actually absorb the frequencies that can penetrate deeper and deeper into the water. Green doesn't get that far into like ocean water, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Plants also have a whole bunch of pigments called carotenoids. Obviously, carrots. Carotenoids are also pigments. They reflect other types of frequencies. Beta carotene reflects orange from carrots. But your carotenoids typically are red and orange and sometimes yellow. And there's a whole bunch of different uses that plants have for carotenoids. But the one we're talking about, because we're talking about light, is some carotenoids are better able at absorbing frequencies that chlorophyll's not great at. And so some of the carotenoids will absorb other frequencies and kind of shuttle the energy over to the photosynthesis system. So they're supplementary frequency absorbers for light. Now, right now, as I talk, the trees are changing color. They're not. What the trees are doing is they're cutting off the water to the leaves, and the molecules in the leaves are starting to degenerate. Typically, the first molecule that degenerates is chlorophyll. So the green goes away. When the green goes away, the colors you're seeing, those were the carotenoids that were there all along. They just were so covered up by the chlorophyll, which is a much more important pigment for photosynthesis, that you couldn't see them. And that's why different trees tend to be different colors. Last year, where the change was much slower, because they didn't get that really, 5 cold nights trigger, the colors weren't that great because everything kind of fell apart on its own gradually. And eventually all you wind up with is the cellulose that's in the leaves. That's what makes them brown, like the paper towels. But carotenoids they're used for other things in plants, but right now we're talking about them as supplementary. Okay, why don't I just do this here? Light hits the water, and certain frequencies get bounced back out. That's why water tends to look blue. And certain frequencies get absorbed, some more than others. As you go deeper and deeper and deeper, as a human, it gets darker and darker and darker. Our eyes actually adapt to the changes in frequencies that are available. We're not necessarily that aware of the changes in colors. But if you go to an ocean tank store and look at the clownfish, there's a whole bunch of brightly colored fish. If you watch a nature documentary and they're down there swimming around and they have these really brightly colored fish, watch when the lights come off the fish. They're not those brightly colored fish when the light's not on them, because they are dull and camouflaged, because what they're reflecting is the light that's in the water around them, not the light that this big flashy light has put on them to suddenly make their pigments reflect blue, when in their natural environment it's a dull brown. And so as you get deeper and deeper and deeper, less and less of the frequencies are available. And algae, as you get deeper, the colors change. Up near the surface, you get green algae, some of the brown algae is like kelp. As you get deeper, the green isn't getting down to the deeper levels. Green plants can't grow down there. Golden algae, they have a different pigment. They use a different chlorophyll. And as you get really deep, sometimes at depths where we wouldn't be able to see, there's not enough light for our eyes to function, you still can find levels of red algae that reflect red and absorb some of the frequencies that are still available down really, really deep. So what we're going to do is we'll pick up land plants in the next one.